Hi everyone! For those of you that don't know, I'm working on a master's in psychology, which requires me to read and write a lot of different things about, well, psychology. The nice thing about doing this kind of work is that when you learn a concept in psychology and you're asked to write using this concept, you're usually allowed to choose a topic that you're interested in and then apply it. And so early on, when we were just learning about some of the basics of social psychology, I chose cult conversion. And so why would people join a cult and why would they maintain membership in a cult? If you're the type of person that has YouTube on in the background while you're cooking, cleaning, running errands, etc., this is going to be the perfect video for you because there's absolutely nothing going on screen. With that being said, let's get started. The title is The Role of Operant Conditioning and Conformity in Cult Conversion. Introduction. The purpose of this paper is to explore how two psychological theories can be applied to better understand the susceptibility of an individual to joining a cult and maintaining membership therein. The two psychological theories that will be explored in the context of cults are social conformity and operant conditioning. Defining a cult. As the word cult has different meanings in society, this paper will use the definition of cult as it adheres to the BITE model. And there is a reference to Stephen Hassan. All of the references that are in this paper will be in the details section below. BITE stands for behavior, information, thought, and emotional controls. These ideas apply to religious as well as non-religious cults. As this allows for a large category, I will focus on charismatic religious cults for the rest of this paper. To summarize the individual sections, behaviors are defined as the actions that one undertakes and may include modifying a person's sleep, sexual, clothing, or food choices. Information control. This section is focused on knowledge acquisition being limited to cult-approved sources. Thought control. Limiting doubts is a major component of maintaining group-approved thoughts. This includes use of vernacular specific to the group and ways to shake doubts that are called thought-stopping techniques. Emotional control. Emotions become weapons of manipulation in the hands of cult leaders, where they are able to use fear, guilt, love, and approval or acceptance in order to exert influence over the member. With an estimated 10,000 active cults in the United States and the influence of social media on our society and our ability to interact with various people around the world, any of us may realistically encounter cult phrasing and cult members. For this reason, it is important to understand conditions that make an individual more prone to cult behaviors. Defining operant conditioning. B.F. Skinner's theory of operant conditioning is ultimately a tool to shape behavior through consequences. The consequences may be added or removed and may reinforce the behavior through rewards or deter the behavior through punishments. Anyone who has worked with animals or children is likely quite familiar with this concept. The other factor to consider with operant conditioning is how quickly or frequently the behavior is rewarded or punished, which is called the reinforcement schedule. These schedules may be immediate and direct, happening 100% of the time the behavior is recognized, or they may be more spread out and randomized. In some cases, the reinforcement schedule is merely perceived. Skinner dubbed this as a non-contingent schedule. The theory of operant conditioning is related to cult membership because the behaviors a member is expected to perform must be learned. The behaviors often go against social norms or against personal beliefs, shaping the new cult member into essentially a different person who behaves as the cult leader wishes. The cult leader asks the person essentially to abandon their previous social group so they can only have allegiance to the leader. This is achieved through administering praise and guilt, as well as causing the individual to appear unusual in non-cult social interactions, which underscores how noticeably different their behavior has become. Defining social conformity. Researcher S.E. Ash conducted a famous experiment that highlighted the power of social conformity to challenge our own perceptions. This study was straightforward and involved one true subject who was being tested alongside peers who were secretly part of the study. The group was asked to judge the length of a line in comparison to other lines, and these so-called peers cited the wrong answer, which led to a 75% conformity rate for the test subjects. When asked privately to identify the correct answer, 98% of the test subjects were able to answer correctly. This simple study brought attention to how individuals may be affected by a group and change their behavior accordingly. Additional research by Ash also found that if one of the peers answered the correct answer, it gave the test subject more confidence to trust their own perception. The theory of social conformity is relevant to cult research because the cult requires strong conformity in order to maintain membership. Hassan explains that beliefs about reality are strictly laid out. This includes black and white thinking and replacing one's understanding of the world with that of the cult's worldview. Most importantly, a cult member must accept and adopt a strict adherence to the word of the cult's leader, even at great personal expense. Since the other cult members are behaving in the same way, it is not simply a matter of the will of the leader versus a single member, but it becomes the will of the leader as enacted by the rest of the members versus a single member, which draws strong parallels to Ash's line experiment. Comparing the two theories to cult research. Operant conditioning and cults. Rewards and punishments that provide immediate enforcement have been mentioned in this paper from both the perspective of Skinner's experiments and Hassan's observations. In both cases, the reward or punishment comes from outside the subject, the researchers in Skinner's experiment and the cult leader or the members in Hassan's observations. There are three other types of reinforcement that must be considered when discussing cults, religious cults in particular. End game, self-reinforcing, and antecedent. One thing that makes a religious cult particularly appealing is their claimed roles in an individual's salvation. This may be claiming to have direct contact with a deity, thus having the most accurate information on how to receive an eternal reward. Or this may be claiming to know information about an apocalyptic event from which the leader can save members. Hassan refers to this idea as elitist mentality. This is why it has been found to be quite difficult to force deconversion in others, as the endgame reward is always mentally present. This concept is not new and actually appears in the book of Proverbs in the Christian Bible. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. With the endgame reward programmed firmly in the mind of a cult leader, it is always accessible even without outside reinforcement, such as when the individual is at work or among non-cult friends and family members. Somewhat similar is self-reinforcement. Strand refers to this as a type of self-soothing behavior, as the individual is administering this reward to themselves. While the endgame reward is always in sight, it can be hard to maintain the course of cult behaviors, especially when a person is not around fellow members. Self-reinforcement provides a way for the quote-unquote good behaviors, which are defined by the religious cult, to receive an immediate mental reward. Self-reinforcement is particularly helpful during the periods that Strand refers to as religious dark periods, which are classified as a time when the person feels less connected to the deity or spirits they believe in. Like the idea of an endgame reward, this is not a new concept. This idea can be found in the Quran, where Surah 47:31. And we will surely test you until we make evident those who strive among you for the cause of Allah, and the patient, and we will test your affairs. Antecedent reinforcement are different from direct praise or other consequences, as the reinforcement comes from a memory rather than a current consequence. In this way, it can be related to self-reinforcement, although others who know the individual may remind them of this major memory. Strand refers to this as a monumental life event, which can be a near-death event or the death of a loved one, as well as a major negative life change such as losing a career. These are not only types of events that can function as the antecedent reinforcement, however. Gallanter found in studying current cult members that 60% consider their antecedent to be some kind of emotional disturbance. Many of the respondents stated that they were lonely, depressed, and the like. In a later study, Gallanter also found that past drug use or mental illness, typically short-term or early onset, is found in the listed case studies. In all cases, the individual feels saved by the cult during an especially vulnerable time, and the memory of that antecedent reward provides long-term reinforcement. Skinner's non-contingent schedule is related to what he felt was the development of superstitious behavior in the test pigeons. The basic observation for this conclusion was that the pigeons repeated behavior they had been doing immediately prior to the positive reinforcement. In the case of the Skinner box, it was food delivery, seemingly believing that the behavior had an effect on the reinforcement. So for those of you guys that aren't familiar with this study, basically randomly the pigeons were presented with food rewards, just randomly. And when the pigeons were presented with this food, whatever they were doing immediately prior to receiving the food, they believed caused the food to come out. And so they actually were bobbing up and down. The food came out, so they'd go next to the lever and bob up and down again. So it was really interesting to see this concept of superstitions developing in a species that isn't humans. Later studies, however, found that the behaviors began to trend towards those that were more directly associated with the reward. The more varied superstitious behaviors observed early in the experiment were termed interim, and those behaviors later refined were termed terminal by Strand. A third type of behavior was also observed, which was dubbed emergent or induced. Emergent behavior was often associated with the natural inclination of the test subject. Strand gives an example of raccoons learning through operant conditioning to receive food by inserting a coin into a slot, which is terminal behavior. But the raccoons had taken to washing the coin, which is emergent behavior, prior to inserting the slot. The washing of the coin actually had nothing to do with the reinforcement, which was the feeding, but was performed anyway as the raccoons are wont to do this action. Another observation in the study by Strand found that emergent behavior is also resistant to other types of reinforcement schedules attempted to unlearn a behavior. In other words, as long as the terminal behavior is established through proper reinforcement, associated emergent behavior is difficult to diminish, as this behavior has been associated with the reward and punishment schedule. As this relates to religious cults, the emergent behavior can arise in conjunction with the aforementioned reinforcement types. The cult's leader actions or mantras, for example, can function as a part of the emergent behavior. This means the individual becomes convinced that some of the positive changes, such as reduced drug use, were a direct result of the cult leader's intervention and the cult's overall support. It appears that Skinner's idea of superstitious behavior was only refined by the Strand explanation rather than disproven, as this type of superstitious behavior can be found in cultures around the world. A simple example is a child who attributes winning a foot race to wearing lucky socks, which is emergent behavior, while ignoring the fact that they had trained hard to improve their running speed, which is terminal behavior. Social conformity and cults. The power a cult leader has over individual members can be classified as undue influence. Ash's experiment was conducted to show group conformity, but of course, a single cult leader is not an entire group. Individuals who have a higher rank in a social group may exude more of an influence for social conformity. In a study on political figures and bigotry, it was found that a politician's position can serve as a model for the socially normative behaviors. This allows for a cult setting, such as a meeting, to supply both an opportunity for group conformity, which is the cult members, and the authority conformity, which is the cult leader. In this way, a cult's meeting may be doubly difficult for a single person to override if they are prone to be in that 75% group that Ash found susceptible to conforming behaviors. This can be especially problematic for members should the cult hold any deviant or antisocial beliefs, or if the leader is suffering from a type of mental illness or psychosis. One interesting type of social conformity found in charismatic religious cults can mirror behavior that is typically associated with psychological disturbances. That is to say, rather than avoid a behavior because it appears psychologically abnormal, it can end up diffusing through the cult members and accepted as a beneficial situation. Gallanter found that up to 30% of cult members interviewed reported what he called a transcendental mystical experience. This experience was characterized by having some type of conflict resolution, as well as inducing hallucinations, but may also involve a type of dissociative behavior, such as glossolalia. For those that aren't familiar with that term, that's when we say speaking in tongues. At the time, Gallanter was unable to determine the mechanism through which this happened, but a more recent study on meditation using fMRI measurements may provide an answer. Mahone et al. Studied different types of meditation. One of these types was labeled automatic self-transcending, which includes allowing the mind to wander without focus and is assisted by a mantra that is not a phrase, but is instead a sound. Glossolalia is more commonly known as speaking in tongues in charismatic religious groups, to include religious cults, which is a reference to a passage in the Christian Bible. And these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall cast out devils, they shall speak with new tongues. As no known words are spoken, it seems like a candidate for this type of meditation. Newberg et al. Found similar with brain scans. As with the Mahone et al. Study, those who were asked about their meditation in the Newberg et al. Study reported an elevated sense of well-being. Studies like this have helped show that the behavior is not pathological, but it is nonetheless still viewed as unusual to those outside of the group, linking it to social conformity of the cult rather than any other reason. Operant conditioning versus social conformity. From the research, it was difficult to choose which psychological theory had a greater effect over a person's decision to join a cult. Overall, I believe that operant conditioning is more influential because engaging with social conformity behaviors, one is mentally or verbally rewarded by the group. It is the reinforcement that keeps the individual repeating the behaviors that may go against their initial desires or knowledge, and it is that reinforcement that keeps the person in the cult. In research done by Curtis and Curtis, they list several factors that make a person susceptible to joining a cult. The points are all related to using the cult as a way to relieve various types of stress that come from different problems a person may encounter in their life. Some such issues were mentioned before, such as a predilection for abusing drugs and alcohol. Other susceptibility factors involve issues where an individual was raised in a home that was abusive and or neglectful, or where the person finds themselves unable to deal with basic survival in the relevant culture. Other cases are less extreme, such as being raised in a home that differs from the wider culture, either due to family beliefs or being from an immigrant family. In any of these cases, membership and acceptance within a charismatic religious cult will provide feelings of acceptance, satisfaction, and a sense of an ultimate goal in which the individual can participate. These would all serve as a type of reinforcement. By further associating with the group to the exclusion of outsiders, thoughts of leaving the group would be met with negative feedback from fellow members or internal feelings of distress, which serve as a punishment to reinforce adherence to group beliefs and obedience. Understanding the two theories, research and our course. When introduced to the theories of social conformity and operant conditioning during our psychology course, we were asked not only to understand the basic ideas and famous studies that related to the theories, but asked to consider them more deeply, especially in the context of same-sex modeling. In my case, this allowed me to consider different influences and how they may affect our behaviors, even in cases where we may intellectually or morally disagree with the concept. Humans are prone to default to behavior that enhances group harmony and maintains or improves social standing. Other information in the course built around these ideas, such as showcasing the importance of primary caregivers for a child's well-being and social development. These ideas, coupled with additional research cited in this paper, provides a great deal of insight to why cults hold such appeal for certain individuals. Cult stereotypes paint them as both highly secretive and highly deviant in their beliefs, and the names of dangerous cults are still known in modern times. The Branch Davidians of the Waco event, the People's Temple of the Jonestown event, and Heaven's Gate of the Final Exit event all have multiple documentaries explaining how these cults took over their members. Other cults, however, may harm those outside their membership group. Aum Shinrikyo gained fame for their failed attempt to harm people on a Tokyo subway in 1995, but they had at least 2 other attacks on outside groups. More recently, before the SARS-CoV-2 virus had spread worldwide, a charismatic religious cult called Shincheonji became well known in South Korea. Unlike the Aum Shinrikyo, Shincheonji did not set out to attack outsiders. Instead, it was their religious practice, coupled with the respiratory nature of the virus, that turned their religious services into a breeding ground for COVID-19. Shincheonji members are required to attend their services even while sick, where they're packed together with floor seating in order to maximize space. Despite knowing more about the virus being transmitted through aerosol droplets, members were heavily discouraged from wearing masks because they believed that it was an affront to their deity. As cases rose and self-quarantine measures for those with COVID-19 had been implemented, members of the Shincheonji cult continued to attend meetings while sick, as that was in line with their beliefs. It can be argued that attending meetings during an airborne epidemic while actively sick and refusing to wear a mask or keep social distance is an antisocial act. Yet the members did not agree with this characterization. In fact, the leadership of Shincheonji encouraged members who successfully overcame the virus to donate their plasma in order to help others. This shows a trust and understanding of medical science in order to help the greater community, which is a sharp contrast to what appeared to be a flouting of the same science and social well-being, with members behaving the way to contribute to the incubation and spread of the virus. Through studying social conformity and operant conditioning research as it pertains to cults, however, I can see how a group may be willing to compartmentalize and hold two seemingly contradictory beliefs, especially if they are encouraged by the leader and the members are rewarded for adherence. Cultural considerations. This paper looks at cults of a charismatic religious nature. The charismatic religious groups themselves do not always fall under the cult label as laid out by the BITE model. Hassan started his work in addressing charismatic religious cults in the mid-1970s, and the first version of his book was published in 1988. This corresponds to an increase in the rise of charismatic Christianity worldwide. Internationally, charismatic Christians rose from 58 million to 656 million, and this was between 1970 to the start of 2021. One of the factors for cult susceptibility is related to family behaviors that include peculiar beliefs and actions. If charismatic Christianity is on the rise, then it stands to reason that a child raised in that home would be more likely to find solace in a charismatic religious cult compared to a person who was not raised in such a family. Similarly, any other factors outlined by Curtis and Curtis that arise at different times would also make a person more susceptible to cult membership, to include the COVID-19 pandemic at the time of this writing, contributing to a sense of losing control over one's life. Conclusion. Hawke states that Skinner was considered a radical behaviorist due to a more strict adherence to the theory of behaviorism and how much of human psychology it can explain. I was not entirely convinced by this position reading about his pigeon experiments, but reading more on the topics in terms of operant conditioning, I would be more willing to argue for a stronger role of behaviorism in human life, choices, and development. Even viewing cults through the lens of social conformity, it seems that willingness to conform is done in order to reach a desired reward or to avoid a punishment, which is at the heart of operant conditioning. If this is the case, that operant conditioning plays a large role in shaping the behavior of cult members, then perhaps further study can be done that can help understand a reliable way to deprogram the members in cases where harm is being done. With all that being said, basically, the idea here that, as far as I understand the research, is that operant conditioning plays a bigger role than social conformity when it comes to joining a cult and then maintaining membership within the cult. When you're at the cult setting, assuming that you can leave and you're not in a cult compound, when you're in the setting of the cult, social conformity absolutely functions as a means to keep you thinking in the same way the cult leader wants you to think. After all, you have somebody of a very high status, which is the cult leader, and you have all these other people exerting that social pressure on you. But then what keeps you in the cult when you leave from the meeting? When you go to work and you interact with other people, when you meet with your family members who are worried that you're in a cult and they're trying to convince you to quit, when you're talking to your former friends and they're trying to get you to quit the cult, what keeps you in there? And that's where I think the operant conditioning comes in, especially with the work that was done in terms of things like antecedent and self-soothing. So even if you're outside of the cult setting and you do start to question, is the cult really providing me some kind of benefit? Is it really as bad as everybody's saying? You have some of these antecedent memories to go back to. Well, no, I used to be an alcoholic, and after joining the cult, I'm no longer an alcoholic. I used to be really depressed, but now I'm not depressed. Therefore, the cult is actually good, and my friends and family just don't get it. And so I think that's why operant conditioning really pushes that factor for cult joining, and also for that problem of staying in the cult, making it so difficult to get outside of the cult. I think that you can sort of think about it as like a mental scaffolding that gets set up in your brain. And the more that you're in the cult, the more the scaffolding gets covered up and turns into like this really solid building. When you're trying to express to somebody that they're in a cult and they should get out of the cult for whatever reason, they're losing money, they're losing themselves, they've cut off their friends and family who love and miss them, it's really difficult to bust down that building because they spend so much time building it. After all, we do things because we feel like they make the most sense to us. And some stuff that made sense to us in the past, we stick to, even though we know it might not be the best thing now, because it's really hard for us to convince ourselves, well, maybe that wasn't the best choice that I made. So we tend to have this idea that we should just keep holding on to choices, relationships, jobs, and all of these other things, even though we don't actually like them anymore. And we can think of all these cons, all these reasons to leave. But the fact that we had made that decision at all, it's almost like an egotistical pride reason for us to stay within. And so not only are you fighting against operant conditioning, which is that person really does get a mental boost, a mental reward from that cult membership, but you're also having to go against some ideas that people have just about their own personality, their sense of self, and it's a really uphill battle. So that's why this is really difficult to convince people, hey, you're in a cult, number one. Number two, it's bad for you. They may recognize they're in a cult and be totally okay with it. I think one of the really good phrases for that was one of the FLDS cults, where one of the girls in the cult was being told that the cult leader was brainwashing them, and she said, yeah, he's washing my brain and he's making it pure. So she understood that everybody saw she was in a cult, and she said, fine, call it a cult, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually really beneficial for me to be part of this cult. If you guys have any questions about topics in this paper, if you have other questions that this had maybe prompted by listening to this paper, please feel free to post it in the comments section below. And of course, always, like, subscribe, share, and all of that other stuff. If you want to find more ways to interact with me, including Patreon for as little as $1 a month, all of those links are found pinned in the comments section below. But as always, thanks for listening.